Hi there, I'm meteorologist Robert Spett. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are. This is Talking Tropics, and this is
meteorologist Lee Southwick. And man, we are recording this right now in the middle of July, and it has been an active season so far.
Oof, people are thinking it started late. It did not. We started pretty early out here. Sea surface temperatures were above average, and already we have had a record-breaking storm out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just start with where we are as of this recording. So if we take the graphic, we have a list of our names, and you can see that we've already had 3 storms, which is actually ahead of schedule already for this time of year. Look at that, a 5 next to Beryl.
Yeah, next to Beryl. And Alberto, of course, so we started off, that one moved over towards Texas area, brought some heavy rainfall there. We also had Chris short-lived down in Mexico, but of course, the big topic is, well, Beryl there. Beryl peaked as a Category 5, top end of the scale.
Yeah, so let's just talk about all the records that Beryl broke. It was the earliest Category 4 and Category 5 hurricane that we've ever seen in the Atlantic.
And this is the strongest ever in June and July. Remember, this peaked as a Cat 4, and then it made up to 5 right at the end of the month. So we're talking about the strongest ever even in the month of June, so a very early on storm system.
Exactly, and then just because it goes into July as well, I mean, it beats the July records, but like you said, June is even more impressive. And then on top of that, it's the only hurricane outside of September to intensify that rapid intensification in the month of June.
And when we talk about rapid intensification, what are we talking about here, Lee?
Well, just how quickly a storm will develop, and there's many reasons for that. In fact, hold on real quick, let me get to the last of the record breaking of that Beryl did. It's the easternmost June hurricane, and the reason for both of these is because of how warm the waters are. You need very warm waters for this rapid intensification, for these storms to quickly strengthen from a tropical storm to a major hurricane.
And this was something, even hopefully if you watched the last few of our Talkin Tropics podcast here, if you haven't, you can go back and watch the other ones right after this. But in our previous ones, we talked about this, about how the sea surface temperatures are warm, and that could not just only lead to more storm systems, but just that rapid intensification, which, from my experience, your experience as well, that is the type of stuff that models have a very hard time handling. And also, it can catch people kind of off guard. I mean, you go to bed, tropical storm, you wake up, check the internet, check the latest update, it's up to a Cat 4, Cat 5.
That happened to us here. It was crazy. I left my night shift as it was a tropical storm and then woke up to a major hurricane. So, yeah, and this is happening because of how warm the waters are. As we mentioned, they're actually at September levels already. In June and early July, they're as warm as they normally are in September, which is why we've been saying this hurricane season is actually running about 2 months ahead of schedule. So we have a breakdown here of the average timeline when we usually see storms. And we usually get our first named storm on June 20th, and then our first hurricane on August 11th.
Yeah.
And then your first major hurricane on September 1st.
And one of the main reasons why we don't get majors usually until September, of course, warmer sea surface temperatures, but also they tend to develop in the main formation region,
right,
which is from the Windward Islands, the Lesser Antilles, all the way out to the coast of Africa. It's kind of our main area. In the month of June and July, that doesn't happen.
Right.
We just don't. The sea surface temperatures are usually not warm enough. Plus, and we're going to talk more about this in a second, we usually have Saharan dust around the area, so it keeps things dried out. This year, not so much the case, was it?
No, and that's why we also had mentioned that Beryl broke the record for being the furthest east. Like you said, it developed in a region it usually doesn't develop in. So here's how we stack up so far. So we were actually right on time for our first named storm.
Yeah, we got that one.
Technically a day early, but still. And then we just jumped right ahead to the hurricane stage. June 29th, which is way ahead of schedule for, August 11th is usually our first hurricane. But then, as we just talked about with rapid intensification, the very next day we had a major hurricane on our hands. And that was 2 months ahead of when we normally see our first major hurricane.
Yeah, I can tell you, and it's not hype, it's not what we're trying to stress, but the Beryl, violent hurricane, and very much, I know it's hurricane season, but a storm that intensity where it was very much out of that season. So looking ahead throughout the rest of hurricane season, what do you think this kind of tells us?
Well, I'm I'm actually kind of scared, to be honest. I mean, just with the warm waters, how warm they already are, and the way that the tropics have been acting, if we're already so ahead of schedule. So for instance, we're recording this right around July 17th, and you can see that's when we usually have our second named storm. And the fact that we already have 3, and we already have our first major hurricane, I think the forecasts are going to verify. So let's get to the forecast in just a moment. But first, just want to point this out. Just for your typical timelines, we had already talked about the first named storm hurricane and major hurricane of this season. But just so you know, we also get our second hurricane usually by August 26th and our second major hurricane by September 19th. So you can just see how far ahead we are in the season already.
Oof. And the third one until October 20th, because typically on average, we only have 3 major hurricanes. This is interesting. CSU and NOAA both expecting not only above average storms, but above average majors. So 6 majors, Cat 3 or higher, in the course of 1 year. We've had that in past years, but just to be expecting it, that is unheard of.
It is. And by the way, since we last recorded our last Talkin Tropics, CSU put out an updated hurricane forecast, and so those numbers you just saw there on your screen are actually a bit higher than where they were last time we talked about this, because they saw the trend too of how it's already been such an active season, and they said, you know what, we're going to bump up named storms to 25. I believe that was 2 more storms than they had at their last outlook, and then they added 1 more hurricane and 1 more major hurricane. So that's why we have 12 and 6 now.
And that just basically matches up with what NOAA is saying at this time as well. And they use a lot of different, trends to make these long-range forecasts, as well as the sea surface temperatures. We're switching over towards a La Nina phase, so just talking about the sheer upper-level patterns, things like that. And this type of phase also means, the trend we're seeing more storms in the deep Caribbean over towards Mexico, Texas, and yes, also into Florida instead of storms recurving out to sea, which Beryl is a classic example of what you would probably see in this type of phase that's being set up here.
So you and I are getting the luxury of recording this right now because we have a little bit of a lull. I'm going to whisper that because we want to keep the tropics quiet. But what I had just showed you there real quick was a little bit of Saharan dust out there, no tropical storms out there. And you were just doing some more research on the Saharan dust. So why don't you...
Well, this is what we're talking about with Saharan dust. And you might be thinking, how does dust, sand from the Saharan desert in Africa influence our weather? It seems unbelievable, to be quite honest. I mean, when I first heard about it when I was a kid, thinking this doesn't make any sense. Well, you got to remember there are tropical ingredients. Is that you need an abundance of moisture, you need very warm sea surface temperatures as well. And the thing is, when dust kind of comes into the middle of that, it's gonna really reduce the moisture in the atmosphere. It's going to make for very dry air. It also sometimes cools sea surface temperature, blocking out the sun just a little bit, but I think the bigger issue is that dry air that just envelops, and that causes, well, less tropical weather systems. Also does make for some pretty sunsets. I mean, that's something you look forward to.
Perk there too, yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remain positive here, and that's because the dust does scatter the light out there. But yeah, this is just a big thing, is that once you start to see that blow across the Atlantic, head over towards our neck of the woods, it does decrease that moisture as well, and tropical systems need that. So it's something we're going to continue to watch out for, and right now we are at least in mid-July tracking some of that Saharan dust moving into the area.
So we like Saharan dust because we like the decrease in tropical activity. We like the pretty sunsets. I do know a few people who don't like it because they say it messes with their allergies.
Yes.
I get that too. So.
And the thing was with Beryl specifically, there was Saharan dust out there, but Beryl kind of threaded the needle between one plume and another plume, and they just allowed it to intensify and grow. So at least through the mid and latter part of July, there is plenty of it out there moving across the Atlantic, but it's something that we do watch out for.
So now that we are in this lull right now, currently, let's talk about where we as meteorologists usually watch for areas of development. Now we know already that Beryl was outside the norm, formed in an area that is not typical for June, but as we look ahead to the rest of July and into August, this is what we're usually watching for, these areas of tropical formation for the month of June. So first, we're going to look in the Gulf of Mexico, which is where we have already seen Storm Alberto and Chris. That is where
3 storms already there, so no surprise.
Yeah.
And then also, of course, the Western Caribbean, which Beryl did move through. It didn't originate there, though. It originated well towards the east, but this is an area that is conducive for development.
Right, and as we head later into July, too, you know, we'll see that. And also a little bit of development in the Bahamas
We
area.
even had an invest area just off the coast of Jacksonville at the
Yes.
beginning of July. So it is a formation area right over the Gulf Stream there.
And then as we get later into July, that's when we start to see the area out in the tropical Atlantic become a bit more active too. So as mentioned for June, it's not as common, and that's why Beryl was so far east, and it was surprising to a lot of us. But well, I'll say surprising, but we knew how warm those waters were. We knew about the dust and the shear. But as we head later into July, that is an area that we do start to watch a bit more.
Yeah, of course. And you know what? I think as we look even ahead into, well, look right here, August, we're going to continue to watch that main formation region. And I can't stress enough, sea surface temperatures out there are exceptionally warm. So you really want to keep an eye on this area, because even with the upwelling, at least a little bit with Beryl, those sea surface temperatures are still well above average.
All right, so I think this is all I had on my agenda, but didn't you have a little treat for us?
This is what I found kind of interesting. So this popped up on my memories today. We're gonna look back 10 years ago today. Look at that young guy. I was tracking a typhoon. This was on TV in Tokyo, Japan, tracking a typhoon in the Philippines. This one caused loads of damage. It moved across Luzon, pretty serious stuff. And just one of those things, you know, looking back at that, it's not just here, when we're talking tropics, not just here in the Atlantic, we have to deal with these storms, but all over the world. So we just try to keep you posted and talk about them.
And he is the expert with the typhoons and all of that, so it's really interesting.
Yeah, just trying to keep everybody informed around the world, but of course here on the First Coast, which, let's bring it back to this. If you have not already downloaded the First Coast News app, of course, download it. We have a very good radar on there. I mean, see it kind of playing behind us, actually. And, you know, we're meteorologists. Sometimes I get a little biased, you know, about the radars and everything, but I truly like our radar on our app. It works really good. And on top of that, you could stream us at FCN Plus, Apple TV,
Roku,
Fire TV as well.
Fire, yes.
Yes. Yeah, all
Hit
of
'em.
those
Check.
places. So,
FCM Plus, though, it's a great tool to just stay updated. As we know, if you're watching this, you're already doing a great job staying up to date through the tropical season. But as we head into August and we see the number of storms start to go up, you know, we'll be ramping up our coverage here too and keeping a close eye on it for you guys.
all right. Well, I'm meteorologist Robert Spetta.
I'm meteorologist Lee Southwick. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.